Hey, warm up, brother, hello! Welcome to Love You Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. Joining me in segment number 2, we're going to have Matt Josephs, better known as Mid-Major Matt aboard. He does tremendous work over at the ESPN Richmond station out there in Richmond, Virginia, and he also does a tremendous job over at FDN Network, FDN Bets. We're going to be talking about the landscape of some of these mid-major conferences, as we're going to be talking a lot about the Atlantic 10 here on the show. We're going to be diving in on James Madison, since that's out in his neck of the woods, and then we're going to couple that with looking at the ACC as well. We're going to talk about Syracuse. They are probably going to be a bubble team once again this season. A lot of the ACC is going to be quite bubblicious as well. So we're going to be hitting upon that in segment number 2. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, and I will preface this with, please do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, because I want to know what you want to be hearing on this podcast. You have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Juden_D1. Keep in mind, there's the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Starting to get it thin on college basketball news, but we are getting some oddities in terms of the college basketball news and notes. We are finding a little bit of an injury news, which we are getting that very unfortunately. We saw that a few days ago with Steele Venters going down for the season for the Gonzaga Bulldogs, and we're also getting some of these international guys being revealed as guys that are going to be on campus, as it takes quite a bit of a process to be able to get any international player eligible and good to go for the upcoming season. We did see that for West Virginia. Haris Elezovic, he was spending a senior year in the country of Canada for the University of Laval. He was playing over at McGill College. He is going to be heading on over to West Virginia. This should be able to provide them with a little bit of size. He was able to log for the team about 12 points, 11.8 rebounds per game. Not a guy that's going to be stretching the floor and is going to be popping a lot of threes or anything like that, but does provide a bit more size for a West Virginia team that doesn't necessarily have that one true big man that is going to be striking fear into you. I do like Eduardo Autry. He's always been a very underrated player in my opinion. They picked him up in the transfer portal during the offseason, but when it comes to this West Virginia team, they're going to be looking a lot to their backcourt, as you've got Tucker DeVries, who comes over with his father and Darren DeVries. You've got someone like Joseph Yusufu, who they're taking a shot on as well. That's another guy that DeVries coached up when he was over at Drake. But other than Eduardo Autry, you really don't have anyone else that's north of 6'8" on the roster. And in terms of this pickup, another guy that stands right around about 6'7", 6'8", so he's going to be more in the range of someone like an Amani Hansberry, but do think that he should be able to contribute down low. You got Toby Okani, who's also right around 6'8". He was a nice combo player over at UIC, someone that's able to pop some threes, so this should be able to help them on the glass. So we did see that movement happen on Thursday, and right now, in terms of college basketball, we are getting set for what is going to be a tremendous season, and we're going to be diving in a little bit more on the Atlantic 10, a little bit more on the middle of the ACC, and so much more with our good friend Matt Josephs, aka Mid-Major Matt. On the flip side, you're on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it's always great to be joined by this man. You know that you've got a man that loves college basketball when his name is Mid-Major Matt, as we've got Matt Josephs aboard. He does great work with the ESPN radio affiliate out there in Richmond with the show Border to Border. Coupled with that, FDN Network, FDN Bets this time of year doing a great job on the baseball front, and college football's back in our lives. I know that he's got his win totals all ready to go there, and you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Mid-Major Matt altogether. And Matt, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Always good to be on with you.
Always great to have you aboard, Matt. And Matt, I know that you are getting set for what is going to be a tremendous college football season, and as the college football season nears, that means that college basketball is right around the corner as well. And just how have you taken a look at this offseason with a whole bunch of hoopla, but having a lot of these moving pieces with the transfer portal being a little bit more set earlier than what we've seen in past off seasons?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you're kind of starting to take a look at the rosters now. You're taking a look at the non-conference schedules as they start to come out now and seeing for travel spots or spots where teams are playing some lesser opponents before rivalry games. You almost want to kind of look for your sandwiches already this part. And of course, the MTE brackets come out as well. And those are always fun because some books put out, who's going to win set MTEs. So there's always some prep that is going on. As you said, college football beginning, you kind of get that out of the way first. And then as the season goes on, you're doing a little bit less college football and a little bit more college basketball.
Yep, absolutely. And when it comes to taking a look at the college basketball season, how have you taken a look at a conference I know is pretty near and dear to you out there in the great state of Virginia in the Atlantic 10? Because you're right there in the neck of the woods of VCU along with the Richmond Spiders. But I think that it's been very fascinating to see this conference, especially Dayton, be able to get in some big name transfers.
Yeah, Posh Alexander coming over from Butler is huge. Zed Key getting him from Ohio State. Dayton lost a lot of talent in this offseason with Deron Holmes going pro and then Kobe Elvis and Kobe Brea going elsewhere. But, when you bring in a guy like Posh Alexander, and it kind of gives Malachi Smith a little bit more time to recover and to not have to do so much early on in the season for Dayton. I definitely put them in that top four that I kind of have. You're looking at St. Joe, who retained some talent. You're looking at St. Louis, of course, as a guy who really touted Indiana State. I was disappointed that Coach Schertz was only allowed to get, not only allowed to, but only was able to get two of his kids over to St. Louis. Of course, there's still two pretty good ones. And then, of course, VCU closer to home, what they were able to do and with the health that they're going to have. Because remember, last year, VCU started without Sean Bairstow, started without Joe Bamaseal, and then had both of those guys come in at the middle of the season. Now they're going to enter the year with some better health, and I think that's going to help out as well.
Yep, that is going to be certainly helping them out. And what else I think is going to be interesting is some of the coaching moves that we did see in the Atlantic 10 as Matt Josephs, aka Mid-Major Matt, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops as the team that not just made the NCAA tournament, but won a game in the NCAA tournament. Duquesne looking a little bit different here in the offseason as they do lose some pieces from the offseason, including having the new coach in Drew Joyce III. That's going to be interesting. Obviously, you touched upon St. Louis with having one of the more, shall we say, big name coaching switches here in the offseason. But I do think that it's going to be interesting for some of these schools that have either made a coaching change this offseason or they did last offseason as well. As you were alluding to VCU, it's now going to be year number 2 in that Ryan Odom system. And typically with these teams in year number 2, I feel like they pop a little bit more, especially with the pieces that VCU has returning.
Yeah, what's going to happen is with the chemistry early on. And I was a little disappointed with VCU's non-conference schedule. I felt like they could have challenge themselves a little bit more. I get worried that they rely so much on Atlantic 10 play that they're like, all right, we can schedule lesser in the non-conference and just do our job in the A10. Well, there's a chance the A10 could get 2 in, but I also think last year we thought they were going to be in position for multiple bids. And of course, we know that, it got to be a bit of a struggle for this conference as a whole, Dayton with the injuries and things like that. So I'm more of a fan of slightly upgraded non-conference schedules when you have the veteran roster that a team like VCU does. Certainly, I don't expect Richmond with all the changes that they have to have an upgraded non-conference schedule, but a team like VCU has everything in front of them and could have helped themselves with some more tough games.
Yep, I feel like that could have been big for them, and that's always something that can nip you in the bud. If you schedule well, if you give yourself an opportunity, sometimes there's a little bit more forgiveness. We certainly saw that for Dayton last offseason, and we have seen insert your favorite ACC schools. We've seen a lot of them schedule very poorly in the non-conference. That has really hurt them, and I know that you are a little bit of a Syracuse guy, so how about if we touch upon that team a little bit as well, because they're in an ACC where I feel like the bottom teams, like obviously Louisville, Boston College, some of these teams have really done a nice job be able to fortify themselves. I don't think that you're going to have any big rusty anchors that are going to be losing 25 plus games, but I think it's such an interesting outlook for them in year number 2 under Adrian Autry, in that the backcourt's going to be looking a little bit different, but bringing back JJ Starlin for year number 2, I think is massive.
Yeah, and there is some continuity there. And as you said, the second year in the program, and maybe some of the guys that they left or did not come back, maybe there were problems last year. We don't know. There's always rumors and stuff like that. But I think one of the keys could be Chance Westry if he's healthy. I felt like almost at times he was a myth last year that we kept mentioning, oh, there's Chance Westry. And then it's like, well, Is he ever going to be available? No, he's not. And then you bring in an Eddie Lampkin at a position of need at center between him and McLeod. And, they've got some size there to be able to. It's funny. They almost have a roster now where they could run a decent 2-3 zone, but that's not their name anymore. That's not how they go. It's a team that I think on certain nights are going to look like they could beat anybody in this conference. And I think there's going to be certain nights where they lose to the Boston Colleges, the Stanfords, and teams like that.
Yep, and they certainly did go the mid-major route in bringing in some of these guys as well, like a Jair Davis is going to be coming in from the Coastal Conference. You've got Juan Carlos, who comes in from Hofstra as well. How do you take a look at some of these guys that are going to be taking a little bit of a stride up in terms of level of competition and will most likely be called upon to contribute right away?
Well, I think Carlos is a good pickup. I think Carlos was a guy at Hofstra. Hofstra challenged themselves quite a bit. I mean, look, the CAA wasn't great all the time, but non-conference, it felt like Hofstra was always playing one or two really tough games. I'm not worried as much about him. The one thing that could be interesting is how much is he going to run the offense and how much is going to add to the offense. And then you've got Donnie Freeman, who's a really good freshman. We haven't had one of those really good freshmen since maybe a guy named Carmelo Anthony. He had a pretty good career at Syracuse. So I think the youngsters, the one thing that's going to be interesting is where's the scoring going to come from? Where is the 3-point shooting going to come from other than Chris Bell? Who else can shoot it on this team? So I really hope that this team can find another shooter because Chris Bell gets nuclear hot and then he also gets ice cold. So they can't really just rely on him.
Yep, and with the ACC, I think that this conference is going to be so much fun because you, in my opinion, have your top teams. Duke, North Carolina, no question about it. These are two teams that are not just going to be competing for the NCAA tournament, but they're going to be in a lot of people's top 10 coming into the season. But after that is where I think it's so interesting. And I do feel like there could be a lot of variance in the conference this year with having perhaps like a Wake Forest perhaps be that number 3. I'm a little bit bullish on Clemson as well, but it feels like there's a hodgepodge of teams that will most likely be on the bubble. And just a few bounces going one way or another could help a team like Syracuse get in the NCAA tournament, but could also cost them an NCAA tournament bid as well, as I think the margins are that thin.
Yeah, Miami's going to be interesting this year. They reloaded a bit with regards to the roster. Is Virginia going to score more than 65 points a game this year? I don't know. I don't know where the scoring's coming from the Cavaliers. We know their defense is going to keep them in most games, but they're going to have just, some 65, 57 games, and they're going to have some where they're the 57, and there's some with the 65. I think it's interesting. A lot of people are downgrading Virginia Tech this year because they changed so much of their roster, but I think that they added this smartly. Bringing in a Hasir Miller as a guy who, watches Temple intently. Hasir Miller won games for Temple. Now, granted, he also had terrible games where he had a lot of turnovers, but I think he's an upgrade. They brought in a couple of shooters. They brought in a couple of guys who bought into the program. So I think Virginia Tech could be that wild card in that conference that if the guys come together, which they may not early because there's so many new pieces, I think Virginia Tech could be a little bit of a sleeper to make the NIT and be a team that could be on the rise going forward.
That'll be a fun team to dive in on as we've got the teams coming over from the ACC and SMU, and boy, SMU I think is so interesting. As joining me on the show, we do have Matt Josephs, aka Mid-Major Matt, joining me right here on Coast Hoops, and that's the one team where I feel like there's going to be a lot of variance because they do bring in a guy in Kevin Miller that knows all about the ACC, was a nice rock solid scorer over at Wake Forest. Chuck Harris was good for this SMU team last season, but they bring in Andy Enfield, who we saw him have his triumphs at USC, we saw him have his issues at USC. They bring in the likes of Cario Quendo, Yohan Traore, so they've got a lot of contributors. I just don't know how it's necessarily going to look out there on the court. And I feel like this team could be able to reach like the top 25 when it's all said and done, but I could see this also being a very difficult year for them in a new conference where they're going to be traveling a ton.
Yeah, this is the thing about the transfer nowadays is that you just never know. You never know how these things are going to look. I think Cal could be a very interesting team. I mean, you look at what Cal brought in with BJ Omot and Jovan Blackshear, and then bringing Matty Sissoko from Michigan State and Lee Dort from Vanderbilt. I think Cal is a team that could be a little bit of a sleeper. And remember, when some of these West Coast trips that some of these schools are going to make, they almost will probably play Cal and Stanford back to back, and some will handle the travel well, and some will handle a quick maybe 48-hour turnaround, 72-hour turnaround well. Some of them may not. How are Cal and Stanford going to handle their trips to the East Coast? Are they going to play 3 or 4 games in a row and then fly back? So, this is one of those things where checking out the scheduling scheduling and the travel sort of situation could be a positive and a negative for certain teams.
Yep, it certainly could be, and I think that this is going to be one of the more interesting teams out there. And I know you're doing some work this year with James Madison as well. A little bit of that is more on the football side, but I know that you're in tune with what's going to be happening on the basketball front. How do you view this team for this upcoming season? Because we saw them have their triumphs in the Sun Belt over the last 2 seasons, but they have turned things over in the offseason with no longer having Mark Byington as their coach. They bring in Preston Spradlin. He brings over a top scorer, Mark Freeman, from 2 seasons ago to be able to help out right away. And while you do have a lot of moving pieces, you do have a guy or two like Xavier Brown who returns from a season ago. And this is a bunch I think is going to be a little bit of a question mark. But as we know with Preston Spradlin, wherever he's been, the defense has been very rock solid.
Yeah, I love Xavier Brown. Had a chance to talk to him several times during the basketball season. I was really glad to see that he came back to the program and became, and I'm assuming will become that leader type for this team. And then, look, crossing over, how's Justin Taylor going to handle it? Justin Taylor's now closer to home. He's a Charlottesville kid. He's not going to be too far from home. Is that going to help him? He was playing out of position at Syracuse. He was perhaps asked to do a little bit too much for the Orange. Is he going to handle that in James Madison, a lower level team? Is he more of a Sun Belt guy than an ACC guy? I also like Elijah Hutchins Everett because that's some size that this team's going to have in the middle. And this is a case where I almost think that the roster is maybe even. I don't know if they're better. They're pretty close to better than they were last year, but I think there's more depth this year. I think there's more players that Preston can play, and I think that, they've got a great building. They've got great atmosphere, so I think this team's going to be very intriguing in the Sun Belt this year because of the fact that their roster is almost completely new.
Yep, it is going to be a lot of fun to take a look at them. And that Sun Belt in general, I think is going to be an interesting conference where you don't necessarily have that dominant team, but the likes of Troy and Arkansas State had some promise last season. Love what Appalachian State is doing as well. Dustin Kearns, I think, is one of the more underrated coaches in all of college basketball. And do want to give you the floor here as well, as I know that you're doing a great job getting set for the upcoming college basketball season. Is there a team or two that you're just not hearing a lot about? It could be a power conference team, non-power conference team, just a team in general that you're taking a look at them more and you're just feeling more and more bullish on them for the upcoming season.
It's a team that's obviously getting talked about a lot, but it was disappointing that the Steel Venters news for Gonzaga. I mean, he was a guy that they were really counting on last year, and then he gets the ACL injury, and then they were counting on him again this year, and then he gets the injury once again. It's disappointing because I feel like he would fit in so well with the Zags, and it'll be what's going to happen behind Gonzaga in that confererence. I think Loyola Marymount could be an interesting team with some of the players that they brought in. Loyola Marymount, I feel like in the past, there's been some, Leo Pepe, everybody knows who he is because of his appearance and everything, but I think this program brought in some key transfers, and we're always looking for that team who's going to be right behind Gonzaga. Is it St. Mary's? Is it Loyola Marymount? Is it Portland? I mean, I don't think it's usually going to be Portland, but Loyola Marymount has an interesting transfer class that I think is going to make some noise in the WCC. We talked about VCU. Richmond's going to be that interesting squad as well. They've got so many sort of transfers that they brought in and some smaller name guys from large programs. They bring in a kid from Michigan, the George Washington kid. They bring in the kid from UConn. I'm not even going to try and say his name. I'm going to have to learn how to say it as it is. But I think if Chris Mooney does the same job that he did last year with his team with this roster, they could also be kind of that sneaky team in the Atlantic 10.
Yep, with the Atlantic 10, I do think that this is going to be a very fun conference to be able to dive in on. And I do like that you bring in the WCC as well, because you bring in those two Pac-2 teams as well. And Oregon State, who's probably not going to do much at Washington State, I think is going to be oh so interesting. And I'm right there with you. I'm having a tough time saying his name as well. Paulus Romaglu. Hopefully I said that correctly, but I think that he should be able to make some contributions for Richmond, just like you're making contributions every time you join me, Matt. You do such a great job on the baseball front. You do a great job on the college sports front, whether that be college football, college basketball, and so much more. So love to get people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I'm in Major Matt on Twitter. The college football season's underway. I love college football. It's one of my best sports. Certainly, if you ever have any questions about props or things like that, I post a lot of my picks on there. As you mentioned, my win totals are up there as well. This is just a great time of year. The NFL's getting set to get underway. That's always a lot of fun to handicap. And of course, Major League Baseball is heading down the stretch. As I always like to say, the hamster wheel that is the sports world continues to turn, and we try and keep up with all of it.
Yep, it's a busy time of year with football now back in our lives. Couple with that, we've got some really good races that are going to be going down in baseball as well. And I know that Matt does a great job of covering so many different things that every single time he joins me, he always delivers a good. So big thanks to Matt for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Jaden_D1. Keep in mind, they does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Expect some conference previews over the next few days, getting prepared to do the Sun Belt over the weekend, and then the SWAC is going to be done very early on next week. So those two are on tap, and we've got a podcast for you all 366 days this year, regular season and off season, rain or shine, I will be there for you. So always do appreciate you tapping in and listening to this podcast, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.